My daughter-in-law put her hands on me inside my own living room, and I didn't make a sound. But the next morning, when she came downstairs expecting to find a broken old woman, she stopped cold in the doorway when she saw who was sitting at my kitchen table. And that smile she'd been wearing since the night before, that satisfied, ugly smile, it fell right off her face like it had never belonged there at all. But for you to understand how we got to that table, I need to take you back a little ways. My name is Dorothy Mae Calloway. I'm 67 years old, a retired school teacher, and I have lived in the same house in Knoxville, Tennessee for 31 years. It's a modest house, nothing fancy, but it has a front porch with a swing and a rose garden I have tended with my own hands since 1994. My late husband Gerald planted the first bush the year we moved in. A yellow climber that still comes back every May without fail, like it's trying to remind me he was here. Gerald passed 8 years ago from a stroke. Quietly, the way he lived, sitting in his armchair with the evening news on, and then just gone. I grieved him the way you grieve someone who was your whole foundation. Slowly, and then all at once, and then in waves for years afterward. But I survived it. I kept the rose garden. I kept teaching until I retired at 62. I kept going to First Methodist every Sunday and sitting in the third pew from the front. And I kept loving my son, Marcus, the way only a mother who has raised a child alone through the hardest years can love someone. Marcus was 39 years old. He worked in logistics for a freight company, the kind of job that paid well enough if you managed your money right. He had his father's jawline and his father's stubbornness, and for most of his life, that stubbornness worked in his favor. He was determined. He showed up on time. He didn't quit things. I was proud of him the way a mother is proud when a child becomes a decent, functioning human being, which sounds like a low bar but is not. As anyone who has raised a child can tell you, he married Renata 4 years ago. I will try to be fair about this because fairness is something I was taught in the classroom and in the church, and I try to hold on to it even now. When Marcus first brought her home, Renata was charming. She was 34, worked in real estate, had long dark hair, and the way of talking that made everything sound like an exciting plan. She called me Miss Dorothy and brought me a candle the first time she visited, one of those expensive ones in a glass jar that smells like cedar and vanilla. I appreciated the gesture. I thought, this woman has manners. This could be good for my son. I will not pretend I saw what was coming. I did not. They married in the backyard of a rented vineyard outside Chattanooga. It was a beautiful day. Marcus looked like his father in the photographs. I cried, which I never do in public, and Renata hugged me and said, "You're my family now, Miss Dorothy." And I believed her. I wanted to believe her. I wanted to believe her. The cracks did not show for almost 2 years. Then Marcus's company reorganized and he was moved from his regional management position back down to a coordinator role. Less pay, less prestige, more hours. He took it hard. Not in the explosive way some men take things hard. He took it in the quiet way. The way that is sometimes more dangerous, where the wound goes inward and festers. He stopped coming to Sunday dinners as often. When he did come, he was somewhere else behind his eyes, and Renata started spending more time at my house. At first I told myself she was being kind. She knew Marcus was struggling. She would come by on a Tuesday afternoon, sit at my kitchen table, drink my coffee, tell me about a house she was trying to sell, a client who was difficult, a neighborhood on the rise. I enjoyed the company. After Gerald, the quiet of the house could be very heavy, but something shifted. I cannot tell you the exact day. It was gradual, the way water damage is gradual. You don't notice it until there's a stain on the ceiling that's been there longer than you realized. She started commenting on the house. Small things at first. "Have you ever thought about painting that hallway, Miss Dorothy? That color is so dated." Then, "You really should have someone look at that roof. A house this old needs maintenance or it just loses value." Then, if you ever wanted to downsize, I could help you get a really good price on this place. The market is strong right now. I told her I was not interested in selling my house. She smiled and said, Of course, of course, I just want to make sure you're thinking ahead. I was not alarmed. I was mildly irritated, the way you are when someone younger talks to you about your own future as though you haven't been living one successfully for decades. What I did not know, what I found out much later, was that Renata had been telling Marcus that the house was a financial opportunity they were wasting, that with what they could get for it in this market, they could pay off all their debt and start over, that I was sitting on an asset while they were struggling, that it wasn't fair, that a good mother would want to help her son. And Marcus, who was already feeling like a failure, let those words root. The requests started coming through him first. Mom, have you given any more thought to what Renata mentioned? About the house? I told my son plainly that this was my home. I had no plans to leave it, and I would appreciate it if the subject were dropped. He apologized. The subject appeared to be dropped. It was not dropped. Renata shifted tactics. She began coming over more frequently without calling ahead. Twice I came home from grocery shopping to find her car in my driveway and her on my porch, having tried the door. She said she just wanted to check on me. I said I was fine and asked her to call before visiting. She said, Of course, Miss Dorothy, I just worry, and smiled, and I felt something cold and deliberate in that smile that I told myself I was imagining. The financial manipulation started the way it always does, like help. They were having a hard month. Could I loan them $800 until Marcus's next commission? I wrote the check. It was not Payback. A few months later, could I cover their car insurance for 1 month just this once? I covered it. It was not Payback. I brought it up to Marcus gently, and he said they would sort it out, not to worry. Anne looked ashamed, and I dropped it because seeing my son ashamed is something I have never been able to tolerate. But what hurt me, what I now understand, was the real erosion, was the way Renata began to speak to me when Marcus wasn't in the room. Little corrections. That's not really how that works, Miss Dorothy. Interrupting my sentences to finish them in her own words. Once, when I told a story about a student I'd had years ago who had gone on to become a doctor, she said, You've told that story before. Just that. Flat. Like a door closing. I was a school teacher for 37 years. I have handled rooms full of other people's children, including the difficult ones, the angry ones, the ones who were hurting at home and taking it out on whoever was closest. I know what it looks like when someone is trying to make you feel small. I know it in my bones. And slowly, over months, I began to feel it. I stopped telling stories at dinner. I started choosing my words carefully around her, the way you choose your steps on uncertain ground. I caught myself apologizing for things that did not require apology, for having an opinion, for remembering something differently, for simply being in my own kitchen when she walked into it. My friend Constance, who has known me since we taught third grade together at Riverside Elementary 30 years ago, came to visit one afternoon and afterward called me. Dorothy, she said, you don't seem like yourself. I told her I was tired. She was quiet for a moment and then she said, I've seen tired, sweetheart. That's not what that is. I did not call it what it was. Not yet. The evening it happened was a Wednesday. Marcus had been out of town for work, his first business trip since the demotion, a chance to prove himself, and he had been anxious about it all week. Renata had asked if she could stay at the house while he was gone because, she said, she didn't like being alone in their apartment. I said yes, because Marcus asked me to, and because I thought it was a husband and wife arrangement I had no standing to question. She had been there 2 days. I was in the kitchen after dinner, washing the dishes, when she came in and set her phone, face down on the counter, and said, I need to talk to you about the house. I kept washing. Renata, we have had this conversation. No, she said, and her voice was different. The politeness was entirely gone. We have had the conversation where you say no and I let it go. I'm done letting it go. I turned off the water and turned around. She was standing with her arms crossed and she looked at me with an expression I had not seen before. Not charming, not calculating, just openly contemptuous, like she had decided she no longer needed to pretend. Marcus and I need that money, she said. You are sitting in this house alone, getting older every year, and at some point something is going to happen to you and the house will go through probate and half of it will disappear into the estate. This is just practical, Dorothy. She dropped the miss that night. I noticed. You will speak to me respectfully in my home, I said, and this conversation is over. Something shifted in her face. Your home. That's always the answer, isn't it? Your home, your house, your garden. You hold on to all of this like it means something while your son is drowning. Do you know how much debt we're in? Do you even care? I said, I have given you money. I have given you a great deal of money that has not been returned, and I have said nothing. Do not stand in my kitchen and tell me I don't care about my son. She laughed. A short, ugly sound. You know what your problem is? You think this is still 1985. You think being Gerald Calloway's widow in this neighborhood means something. Nobody cares about any of that. The house is worth $400,000. You are 67 years old. And Marcus is your son, not some distant relative you write charity checks to. I told her I was going to bed and asked her to please remember she was a guest in this house. That was when she stepped in front of me. She was close, closer than I was expecting, and she grabbed my arm, not gently, and said, I'm not done talking to you. I said, let go of my arm. She did not let go. She gripped tighter and said, sign the house over to us, put it in Marcus's name. You can stay here. Nothing changes for you, but we need that security, and you are being selfish. I said, Renata, let go of my arm right now. And then she shoved me. Both hands flat against my chest, and I went back against the kitchen counter. The edge hit me at the small of my back, and I made a sound I was not expecting to make, a sharp, involuntary cry. And then I caught the counter with both hands and did not fall. The magnets on the refrigerator rattled. A small ceramic dish on the counter skittered off the edge and hit the floor and broke into 3 pieces. That dish had been on my counter for 22 years. My granddaughter made it in a pottery class when she was 7. She had painted it yellow and put a crooked sunflower on the side, and I used it to hold paper clips and rubber bands and small things that didn't have a better home. She was 15 now and would not remember making it, but I remembered. Renata stood there looking at me, and I could see from her face that she was surprised at herself, but not sorry. That was the important thing I noted in that moment. She was surprised, but not sorry. I straightened up slowly. My back was singing. I looked at her and I did not speak. She said, I didn't mean, and then she stopped and reset her jaw and said, just think about what I said, and she walked out of the kitchen. I heard her go upstairs. I heard the guest room door close. I stood in my kitchen and I looked at the 3 pieces of that yellow dish on my floor. I did not cry. I did not yell. I did not call Marcus, who was in a hotel in Charlotte preparing for a meeting in the morning that mattered to him. What I did was what I've always done when I need to think clearly. I made a pot of tea. Earl Grey, the loose leaf kind that takes a few minutes longer. I set the kettle on, and while I waited for it to boil, I picked up the 3 pieces of the yellow dish and held them in my palm for a moment, and then set them on the windowsill above the sink. I was not going to throw them away. I sat at my kitchen table with my tea, and in the quiet of my house, I thought very carefully. I thought about what had just happened, what it meant, and what I was going to do about it. I thought about Constance. I thought about Reverend Harlan at First Methodist, who had buried Gerald with me and who had known our family for 20 years. I thought about my neighbor Franklin, a retired county sheriff's deputy who had been Gerald's friend and still came by every few weeks to check on the roses and drink a glass of sweet tea on the porch. Franklin was 71, moved slower than he used to, but he still had the bearing of a man who spent decades standing between disorder and people who needed protecting. I also thought about my daughter-in-law asleep upstairs in my house, and about the fact that I had said nothing for months. The money I had given, the insults I had absorbed and labeled as stress, the way I had shrunk in my own kitchen. I thought about what comes next if I say nothing again. I knew what came next. I had watched it happen to other women, other families. What comes next is worse. I thought, she has a flight home tomorrow evening after Marcus gets back. I have until then. I went to bed. I slept, which surprised me. I woke at 5:15 in the morning when it was still dark and the birds had not yet started and the house was completely still. I lay there for a moment looking at the ceiling and I felt something that I can only describe as clarity. The kind that comes sometimes in the very early morning when the world hasn't started yet and your mind is still clean from sleep. I knew exactly what I was going to do. I got up and put on my bathrobe and went downstairs. I called Franklin first. It was early, I knew, but Franklin was a man who woke at 5 regardless and was not bothered by early calls. He answered on the second ring. Dorothy. Everything all right? I said. Franklin, I need to ask you something. Renata put her hands on me last night. I said it plainly, the way I would state any fact. There was a pause. Then, tell me what happened. I told him. All of it. The money, the months of pressure, the conversation the night before, the shove, the broken dish. Franklin listened without interrupting, which is something Gerald always admired about him, that quality of full, present listening. When I finished, he said, Where is she now? Sleeping. She has a flight at 6 this evening. He said, What do you need from me, Dorothy? And I told him. He was quiet for a moment, and then he said, I'll be there at 9. And Dorothy, you're doing the right thing. This should have been stopped a long time ago. I'm sorry it wasn't. I thanked him, and I called Constance. She answered immediately, which told me she had been awake, which told me she had been worrying since her visit. I told her the same story. She made a sound twice during the telling. Once when I described the shove, once when I mentioned the broken dish. But she did not speak until I was finished. Tell me what you need, she said. Constance and Franklin have never met, but they responded the same way, and I was struck by that. Tell me what you need. Not outrage, not advice, not warnings. Just tell me what you need. This is what a real friend sounds like. I told her. She said, 9 o'clock. I will be in that kitchen. Then she said, Have you eaten anything? I said, Not yet. She said, I'm bringing biscuits and jam. I made a third call, the hardest one, to Marcus. He answered on the fourth ring, groggy, and I could hear the hotel in the background, the particular quiet of a room that isn't home. Mom? It's early. Is something wrong? I said, Son. I need to tell you something and I need you to listen to all of it before you speak. And I told him. His silence during the telling was different from Franklin's and Constance's. It was a heavy silence, the silence of a person whose understanding of something is shifting under their feet in real time. He didn't speak until I'd finished, and then the first thing he said was, She pushed you. Yes. Another silence. Then, Mom, and he stopped. You don't have to say anything right now, Marcus. Your meeting is this morning and it matters and I want you to do well in it. But I need you to know what happened and I need you to know what I've decided. He said, I'm coming home. I said, Your meeting. I'm coming home, Mom. His voice had gone very quiet. I'll get the first flight I can. I'll get the first flight I can. I should be there by noon at the latest. He paused. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. I should have. I knew things were. I should have done something. I said, Marcus, do well in your meeting. Then come home. We'll talk. After I hung up, I sat for a moment in the particular stillness of that early hour. The sky outside the kitchen window was beginning to change, the deep black going to the dark blue that comes just before dawn. I made myself a proper breakfast because I knew I needed to eat. Scrambled eggs, toast, a sliced pear. I sat at my kitchen table and ate every bite, and I drank my coffee, and I looked at the pieces of the yellow dish on the windowsill, and I thought about my granddaughter at 7 years old, tongue between her teeth, painting that crooked sunflower. At 7:30, I heard the shower running upstairs. At 8, Renata came down. She was dressed, her hair done, rolling a small suitcase she must have packed already. She stopped at the bottom of the stairs when she saw me sitting at the kitchen table. "I thought I'd get breakfast somewhere on the way," she said. Her voice was cautious, not apologetic, cautious. She was gauging the room. I said, "You're welcome to sit down. There's coffee." She looked at me with the expression of someone trying to work out whether this was a peace offering or something else. She decided it was a peace offering or something else. She decided it was a peace offering. She set her suitcase by the front door and came into the kitchen and poured herself a cup of coffee and sat across from me. "About last night," she started. "We don't need to discuss it right now," I said pleasantly. "Constance is coming at 9 and Franklin is stopping by. I'd like you to be here to meet them." She frowned. "I know Constance. She's your teacher friend." "Who's Franklin?" "Franklin Webb. He was a deputy sheriff for 26 years. He and Gerald were close. He still looks in on me." Something moved across her face. "Dorothy, I really do have a flight." "Not until 6, I said. "There's plenty of time." She was quiet. She drank her coffee and looked at her phone and did not speak. And I sat across from her and drank my coffee and looked at my rose garden through the kitchen window, the yellow climber just visible past the edge of the porch, waiting on spring. At 9 o'clock exactly, the doorbell rang. Renata's eyes came up from her phone. I stood slowly, smoothed my cardigan, and walked to the front door. I opened it to find Constance on my porch with a container of biscuits and her reading glasses pushed up on her head, and Franklin beside her in a clean button-down shirt, his old deputy's bearing still completely intact in every line of his posture. Behind them, coming up the walk, was Marcus. He had gotten an earlier flight. He was still in his work clothes from the day before, and he looked like he hadn't slept on the plane. And he looked, more than anything, like a son who has understood something late. He met my eyes on the porch and he said, "Mom," and his voice held everything he hadn't finished saying on the phone. I nodded at him. I said, "Come in." They came in, Constance first, then Franklin, then Marcus, and I led them to the kitchen. Renata had stood up. She was holding her coffee cup and she looked at the three of them and then at me, and her face went through a sequence: confusion, caution, the beginning of understanding, and then something that I recognized from 37 years of classrooms. The particular look of someone who has done something they cannot talk their way out of and knows it. "Marcus," she said, and her voice had already shifted into the mode I had heard her use on difficult clients: conciliatory, reasonable, slightly injured. "I didn't know you were coming back early." "I can explain. Sit down, Renata." It was Marcus who said it, not me. His voice was quiet. She sat down. Franklin took a seat at the table without being asked, with the unhurried authority of a man who spent decades walking into rooms and making them orderly by his presence alone. Constance set the biscuits on the counter and stood beside me and put her hand briefly on my back, a light contact, a reminder that she was there. Marcus remained standing. I sat down at my own table. I folded my hands. I said, "Renata, I asked these people here because what happened last night was not a private matter between two women. It was something that requires witnesses." She said, "Dorothy, I think you're—" Let me finish. My voice came out exactly as I intended, measured, without heat, clear as a bell. 37 years of holding a classroom. You do not lose that. You have been pressuring me to sign over this house for months. You have borrowed money you have not returned. You have come into my home when I was not here. You have spoken to me with contempt repeatedly in my own kitchen. I paused. And last night, you put your hands on me and shoved me into my own counter. Renata's eyes moved to Marcus. "Marcus, she's—" "I was on the phone with her at 5 this morning," he said. He would not look at her. He was looking at the table. I heard what she said. She's exaggerating. It was barely, she has a bruise on her lower back. I had checked in the mirror that morning. I had taken a photograph on my phone, which Constance had helped me text to Franklin and to Marcus. The silence in the kitchen was complete. Franklin spoke then, for the first time. He did not raise his voice. He did not need to. Miss Renata, he said, I worked in law enforcement for 26 years. I've been in more kitchens than I can count, in more situations than I'd like to remember. What Dorothy has described is domestic abuse. I want to be plain about that so there's no confusion about what we're talking about. Renata's mouth opened. I'm not finished, Franklin said pleasantly. Now, Dorothy has decided how she wants to handle this morning, and I'm here to support her decision and to make sure everyone is clear on the facts. But I want you to understand that what happened last night has a name in the law, and that name carries consequences. The color had left Renata's face. Constance leaned against the counter and looked at Renata with the expression of a woman who has known her best friend for 30 years and is choosing her words with the precision of someone who taught language to children for a career. You know what I find interesting, she said, conversationally, is that you came into this house, ate at this table, borrowed this woman's money, and then decided to put your hands on her because she wouldn't give you what you wanted. She tilted her head. I'd like you to think about who you are when no one you're trying to impress is watching. Renata looked at Marcus. I could see her recalculating, trying to find the approach that would work on him, the appeal that would shift the room. Marcus pulled out the chair next to mine and sat down. He didn't look at his wife. He looked at me. Mom, he said, I need to tell you something. I waited. I knew she had talked to you about the house. I knew she was putting pressure on you. He stopped. His jaw was working. I told myself it was just her way of trying to solve a problem. I told myself you were strong enough to say no. I told myself it wasn't that serious. He looked up. I should have stopped it. I knew it was wrong and I let it go on because I was ashamed of our situation and I wanted someone to fix it. And I let my wife do things I never should have allowed. His voice broke slightly on the last word. He cleared it. I am sorry, Mom. I'm sorry I wasn't here. In 39 years of being this man's mother, I had seen him cry twice at his father's funeral, and once when he was 9 years old and a dog he loved had to be put down. I watched his face now, and it was very close to a third time, and I felt the complicated, ancient ache of a mother who loves her child through their failures as fiercely as through their victories. I said, I know, Marcus. Renata stood up abruptly. I don't have to sit here and... You can go, I said. I said it calmly. Take your suitcase. There are hours before your flight, and I imagine you'd like the time. She looked around the table. Franklin, steady. Constance, still. Marcus, who did not look at her. Marcus, she said. Her voice was different now. Smaller. He said, I'll call you later. We need to talk. She stood there for another moment, and I think she understood that the room had a weight she was not going to shift. She picked up her coffee cup, set it in the sink, an automatic gesture, domesticated and absurd in the circumstances, and walked out of the kitchen. We heard her take her suitcase from the hallway. We heard the front door open and close. The four of us sat in my kitchen in the quiet she left behind. Constance put the biscuits on a plate. Franklin poured himself the second cup of coffee. Marcus sat with his elbows on the table and his face in his hands for a moment, and then he straightened up and looked at me. I reached over and put my hand on top of his. His hand was large, like Gerald's had been. I held it and I said nothing because nothing needed to be said right then. The weeks that followed were not simple. Nothing honest ever is. Marcus and Renata did not separate immediately. They went to counseling, which I privately thought was overdue by years. I told Marcus that I was glad he was doing that, and I meant it. But I also told him clearly, the way I tell things when clarity is more important than comfort, that Renata was not welcome in my home until a great deal of work had been done and a great deal of time had passed. He nodded. He understood. Franklin helped me look into filing a formal report. I did. I want that on record, I told him. Not because I want her prosecuted, but because if anything ever happens again, there is a history. Franklin said that was the right call and filled out the paperwork with me at my kitchen table on a Tuesday afternoon while Constance made soup on the stove. The money I had loaned, I let it go. I had to let it go, not for Renata's sake, but for my own. Carrying the weight of what is owed to you by someone who will never pay it back is its own kind of imprisonment. I wrote it off in my ledger and in my heart, and I did not look at it again. I took the 3 pieces of the yellow dish and I glued them back together with ceramic adhesive. The cracks show. They will always show. I put it back on the windowsill and I look at it every morning, and what I see is not brokenness. What I see is something that was damaged and is still here. I find that useful. My granddaughter came to visit in the spring with her mother, Marcus's sister, who lives in Nashville and is a whole other story for another time. She saw the dish on the windowsill and said, "Grandma, did something happen to my dish?" I told her I had broken it and glued it back together. She picked it up and turned it in her hands and looked at the seams where the glue had dried, slightly cloudy, and she said, "It still looks like a sunflower." I said, "Yes, it does." She set it back down on the windowsill, satisfied, and went to look at the roses. Constance was right that spring afternoon when she looked at me and said I didn't seem like myself. She was right, and I had been not myself for longer than I wanted to admit. When you spend enough time making yourself smaller to accommodate someone else's need for space, you can forget your actual size. You can forget what it felt like to take up your rightful room. I remembered. That morning in my kitchen, with Franklin and Constance and my son at my table, I remembered. Not with noise, not with victory, but with the quiet, bone-deep sureness of someone who has come back to themselves. My house was mine. My table was mine. My yellow climbing rose was mine, and it was going to bloom again in May, the way it had every May for 30 years. And I was going to be there to see it. I am still there. I am still seeing it. And if you are listening to this from your own kitchen, your own living room, wherever you find yourself tonight, and something in this story sounds familiar, if you recognize something in the way I described getting smaller, or the way I explained away what was happening, or the way I kept telling myself it wasn't that serious, I want you to hear this. The ground is solid. Even when everything feels like it's tilting, the ground is solid and you can push off from it. You know where you are. You know whose house you're in. That matters. That has always mattered. If this story reached you, please leave a like so I can keep bringing more. And tell me in the comments where you're listening from tonight. I'd love to know. There are more stories on the screen right now, and I think you'll find one worth your time. Don't forget to subscribe. Until the next story.